There is nothing you can ever imagine in your life that would be like that. It is so utterly spectacular. Other people, they're so different. They have their own worlds, right? It's like traveling to another country. But God, it gives you an entree into a totally different way of thinking about the world. Mm-hmm. The self is a construction of our minds. There actually is nothing there. A lot about an African culture called the Akan in West Africa, in Ghana, and their concepts of the soul, the spirit, and the body, and they have a word in there called Sun Sum, and we translate it to spirit. But then I'm reading the African philosophers who actually know that word, and they go, it's not the same as the word spirit, and then they go on and describe it. And that one word contains all of these other worlds that are so weird and interesting that the word spirit in English does not convey, right? And other languages have that sense. And so language can have that possibility where it opens up. It's not just this one track meaning. It has other valences, other possibilities to it, right? Mm. And so, yeah, we're kind of deadening our language in a way. And, if you study like other cultures, Eskimos had like 1,000 words for snow, and we have one word. Russians have like 40 words for the color blue, and we have one word, kind of thing. As the language gets smaller and smaller and more uniform, our thoughts become more and more limited and uniform. So to hear a word like inner sky, it opens up all these other ideas in your mind. Mm. Whereas we don't have a word like that in English, Mm. And then because I'm doing things with Zen, Japanese language is so rich with things that we can't possibly even begin to express in English, As I said, it's something I'm writing about right now. So music and the audible stuff is very, very interesting and very exciting. So there's this new phenomenon where musicologists have been able to recreate music from eras that we never could listen to before. So I was writing at one point about a festival in ancient Greece, and to put me in the mood, I wanted to hear ancient Greek music. Well, that doesn't exist. I mean, there are no recordings of it, but sure enough, there are. And the rhythms and the sound is so weird and alien that music captures the spirit of a time, right? So if we're only hearing these same melodies, you hear cars going by with that same kind of pop song, it's such a limited circle of harmony, such a limited circle of what music can be. But when you open up to African music, to music from ancient Babylonia, to Greece, to music in South America, other rhythms, other poetry in music and sounds, it's mind-blowing, it's interesting. So that's what I'm saying, that the human animal is much more interesting than we think it is. Reading about ancient cultures is a very mind-expansive project you can go on. What's so exciting now is they have these books called The Daily Life in Ancient Babylonia, The Daily Life in, I forget which city in India, The Daily Life in Ancient Greece, etc. And you get a feel for not just the grand philosophical issues, but how people ate, what their houses were like. And so I just wrote a chapter about our relationship to time and history. And I was trying to take the reader, in my new book, I'm giving them exercises. And I'm saying, try to imagine yourself in a world 1,000 years ago, and you walk out your front door. There's no mechanical sounds. There's no airplanes. There's no cars. There's no machines. It's just birds. Maybe a saw and a hammer is the most you're going to hear. That's a strange thing. There are no signs. There are no advertisements. There's no words everywhere. It's kind of empty, right? You're just wandering around. There are all these kind of rancid, weird, horrible smells because people aren't bathing. But they're very human smells, right? Your whole sensory experience is on another level. But when you live in this 21st century world where things are so sanitized, where we don't smell these things, we only hear these packaged mechanical sounds, your sensory world is shrinking down and down and down. And you realize, yeah, ancient world, they had some bad stuff. They weren't very good. You know, they had slavery. I understand all of the negatives, so I'm not painting this portrait. But on another level, their realm of senses, their realm of language, their internal worlds were far richer than ours. And by connecting to that, by reading these books, not just the daily life thing I said, but actually text from those times, as I was mentioning when I read a monk, a Zen monk from the 11th century, and the different thought processes, it opens my mind to a different way of thinking, to a different way of accessing reality. But like, I'm reading a lot about Aztecs, because I'm sort of obsessed with the Aztecs. I don't know why. And they had these amazing spectacles. That was the thing about the ancient world, these festivals and spectacles that are far beyond Burning Man or any rock concert, right? You know, I could describe the fire ceremony in Aztec culture that only occurred every 70 years. There is nothing you can ever imagine in your life that would be like that. It is so utterly spectacular. And so I had this 800-page book called Aztec Philosophy. And it's very theoretical, but God, it gives you an entree into a totally different way of thinking about the world, right? Where they have these metaphors that the universe has this energy. Some of the energy is like string that's being wound around in a certain way. It's like weaving, like other things like that, this kind of energy that the world has a bit, you know?
Yeah.
We're all born with a capacity for empathy. It's something that interests me a lot because the feeling that I'm connecting very deeply to another person, let's say my wife, etc., is a very overpowering emotion. It gets me out of myself, and I'm seeing the world through her eyes, as opposed to me always projecting myself onto her. It's a very moving experience. And sometimes you go to a movie and you find yourself getting inside the characters, you're getting outside of yourself, and you're feeling this empathy for them, you're identifying with them. These are all very powerful emotions, right? And we all have the capacity for that. But the world we live in is actually a machinery to deaden those emotions of empathy, right? It's just put so much emphasis on ourselves, on our individuality, on who we are, our needs, you know, the attention that we want, that we deserve. We're so focused on ourselves that natural feeling of wanting to get inside of another person. And you know, it's very strange, Jay, because if you think about it, our inner lives are actually quite boring. The same thoughts repeat over and over and over again, the same emotions, the same preoccupations, the same anxieties. And other people, they're so different. They have their own worlds, right? It's like traveling to another country. So we should actually be much more oriented towards other people. We should have a natural interest in their world because it takes us out of ourselves. It's like therapy. But it's been deadened by so many things in our world, by social media, by the pressures we're under, by just modern lifestyle. And so that empathetic muscle that everybody has is kind of atrophying. And yet there'll be moments where it kind of sparks to life and you feel like, God, I want that. I want more of that in my life, more of that in my world. How do I get it? Yeah. You know, so like I'm meditating in the morning and I'm trying to empty my mind and I'm going into what's known as a koan, right? And then these thoughts keep bubbling up and they're so annoying and it makes you aware of of the machinery of your own mind. It's not real, it's a phantom, right? It has no reality. Reality is your body, the present moment, the birds outside, the sky, where you are sitting, the fact that you're alive, that your blood is pumping. These are real. But that thought in your mind is a shadow. It's a phantom. It doesn't exist. It has no reality. And so I go through this process where don't engage with it. And it's really weird because then my mind plays tricks on me and it pulls up a thought that's definitely going to engage me. I'm not going to engage with it. And it made me realize as I went through that process that this is what social media is based on. Social media has mirrored the human brain on a large scale. We have thoughts that are designed to grab our emotions and make us think about them repetitively over and over again, compulsively, right? And there's probably a purpose behind that. But social media is actually a genius at that, at putting up things up there. They're going to engage our emotions, so we have to pay attention. So I always try and, every time that happens, I withdraw and I say, it's just a thought. It's not real. It's not who I am. This is a very important part of meditation. Your thoughts are not who you are. They're a separate part of yourself. You are something different from your own thought. Something I read recently in one of the Buddhist books that I like to read, that said our minds are basically topsy-turvy. They're upside down. So the reality is, we don't I don't want to get too deep into this, but we don't really have a self. The self is a construction of our minds. There actually is nothing there. And that kind of emptiness, that egolessness, is enlightenment. It's a beautiful feeling. And maybe in your life you've touched upon it briefly. I know I've touched upon it briefly. It's not the reality I have every day. But that's real. And what's not real are the thoughts. But everything is turned upside down in our worlds. And so these delusionary thoughts about people, about who I am, about my habits, etc., they become our reality when it's exactly the opposite. Right? You have to be able to be aware of that. And so, meditation is all about becoming aware of these things, because we walk around like automatons. I'm very into this writer named Gurdjieff. I don't know if you've ever heard of Gurdjieff.
No, I haven't.
He was he's basically from Armenia. He was in the beginning of the 20th century. He was this man who was very interested in mysticism, and he traveled throughout Asia trying to find the essence of all the different esoteric philosophies, and he created his own philosophy. And it's very interesting, very exciting stuff. He wrote a book called In Search of the Miraculous that I highly recommend people. And it's not woo-woo stuff. He was a very, very practical man. He puts it in very practical terms. But his idea is that we walk around asleep. We're on automatic pilot constantly. We're not really aware that we're breathing, that we're existing. We're not aware where our thoughts come from. We're not aware of how our body moves, etc., etc., etc. And so it's a process of slowly becoming aware